He thought his land was safe when 50 acres passed down through generations, a symbol of his family's resilience and hard work. But one morning, without warning, strangers claimed it wasn't his anymore. The signatures were forged, the sale was approved, and his legacy was gone. What the HOA didn't know was that this man wasn't about to vanish quietly. His response would shake the very ground they walked on and turn their world upside down. How did a stolen dream lead to the ultimate act of justice? For Marcus Hayes, life in rural Georgia was simple, steady, and rooted in the soil beneath his feet. His 1,500 acres weren't just property, they were a living history, passed down from his great-grandfather, who had fought through Reconstruction to claim and keep this land. Each field told a story. Rows of pecan trees his father planted by hand, weathered barns built with the help of neighbors, and a creek where he'd taught his own children to fish every morning. Marcus rose before the sun, his boots sinking into dew-soaked grass as the horizon turned gold. He knew every fence post, every trail, every sound the land made. It was more than ownership, it was a bond. His family had survived poverty, racism, and countless attempts to push them out, yet the land had always remained theirs. Marcus was more than a landowner, he was a pillar in his community, known for lending tools, offering advice, and showing up at every church fundraiser. He sponsored youth baseball teams, donated to food drives, and quietly helped struggling farmers pay their bills. His life was built on hard work, quiet dignity, and an unshakable belief that what you earn, you protect. But change had been creeping in. New developments began rising nearby: cookie-cutter houses with manicured lawns, imported palm trees, and a homeowners association that spoke the language of progress but carried an undertone Marcus recognized all too well. They talked about beautifying and standardizing the area. To Marcus, those words meant erasing its history. He kept to his land, paying no mind to their rules. Until one morning, an envelope arrived, one that would upend everything. Inside was a letter claiming his land was no longer his. The words were cold, the paperwork official. And yet, Marcus had never signed a thing. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And the storm that was coming would test not just his patience, but his very right to exist on the land his family had bled for. Marcus stared at the letter until the words blurred. Property transferred. Sale complete. New ownership registered. Each line felt like a punch to the chest. He drove into town that same morning, clutching the papers like evidence of a crime. The clerk at the county office barely looked up from her screen when he handed them over. "Looks legit," she said, flipping through the pages. Marcus pointed to the signature, his name written in a slanted hand he'd never use. "That's not mine," he said firmly. She shrugged. "You'll have to take it up with the HOA. According to this, you sold." The HOA's office was just a few miles away: sleek glass windows, trimmed hedges, and a parking lot full of expensive cars. Inside, the air was cool, almost sterile. A man in a tailored suit greeted him with a practiced smile. Marcus didn't sit. "You forged my name," he said, holding the papers up. The smile didn't falter, but the man's tone sharpened. "We followed procedure. If you believe there's an error, you're welcome to hire legal counsel." It wasn't just an error, it was theft, wrapped in bureaucracy and sealed with arrogance. Marcus walked out knowing one thing: this wasn't a misunderstanding. They wanted his land. Over the next weeks, the situation escalated. Surveyors appeared unannounced, walking his property with clipboards, marking trees with orange paint. Construction trucks idled just beyond his fence. When Marcus confronted one driver, the man smirked and said, "You're trespassing on our development site now." Word spread in the community, but support was mixed. Some neighbors whispered that Marcus should just take the payout and move on. Others avoided him altogether, fearful of crossing the HOA's board, which seemed to have deep pockets and powerful friends. At night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked the perimeter of his land with a flashlight, the beam catching fresh stakes hammered into the earth. Each one was a small invasion, a quiet announcement that his control was slipping. Then came the notices. Thin envelopes in his mailbox, each stamped "Final Warning." According to the HOA, he owed thousands in unpaid association dues, penalties for non-compliance with community standards. Marcus had never joined the HOA, never agreed to their rules, but they claimed his land now fell under their jurisdiction because, according to their records, it was part of the development. The more he pushed back, the more aggressive they became. A lawyer friend warned him, "They're trying to bleed you dry, drag you into court until you can't fight anymore." But Marcus was no stranger to a fight. His great-grandfather had faced sheriffs and land agents who came with guns and false deeds. His father had battled banks that redlined black farmers. Marcus understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about property, it was about erasure. One afternoon, Marcus returned from town to find his gate padlocked from the outside. A printed sign flapped in the wind, "Construction in progress, no trespassing." His stomach churned. His own home fenced off like he was the intruder. He cut the lock with bolt cutters and drove up the gravel road, anger pounding in his temples. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the piles of documents, the photographs of surveyors, the notices. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. The HOA thought they could hide behind legal loopholes and intimidation. But Marcus had something they didn't expect: resources, connections, and an iron will. He began making phone calls, not just to lawyers, but to people who understood property law inside and out. He dug through public records late into the night, and what he found was a thread, one that, if pulled, might unravel everything the HOA had built. The next move wouldn't just be about saving his land. It would be about striking back in a way that would leave them powerless. And he knew exactly where to start. Marcus's kitchen table looked more like a war room now, maps spread across the surface, piles of public records, property deeds dating back over a century. But there was one folder he kept at the center, its edges worn from handling. The HOA's own filings. Weeks of digging had revealed a fatal flaw in their empire. Years earlier, in a rushed land purchase, the HOA had failed to clear certain legal titles. That meant dozens of the homes they'd sold, lavish, high-priced houses, were technically built on land that still belonged to a trust Marcus's grandfather had established. It was a loophole, but in the right hands, it was also a weapon. Marcus filed his own legal claim quietly, strategically, through a team of lawyers who understood the game. The process was slow, hidden from public view, until one afternoon, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the HOA's monthly meeting. Witnesses said the deputy walked straight to the front of the room, handed the HOA president a thick envelope, and said just 2 words, "You've been served." Within days, panic rippled through the development. Homeowners received certified letters informing them that Marcus Hayes now held legal claim to their properties. Not just the dirt beneath their homes, but their homes themselves. The calls started immediately. Angry voices, accusations. People who'd never spoken to Marcus before were now pounding on his gate, demanding answers. Some shouted racial slurs, others threatened lawsuits. The HOA board issued statements calling him a rogue actor and a threat to community stability. But Marcus stayed silent. Then came the breaking point. A local news crew, tipped off by an anonymous source, arrived at Marcus's property. They wanted to know why a small-town farmer was suddenly at the center of a multi-million-dollar property dispute. Standing in front of his barn, Marcus told them the truth, not just about the forged sale of his land, but about the century-long pattern of forcing black landowners out through fraud, intimidation, and legal manipulation. The interview aired that night. Within hours, his story went viral. Hashtags spread across social media. Civil rights groups reached out. Legal experts called it one of the boldest counters to land theft in recent history. The HOA doubled down. They called emergency meetings. They tried to spin the narrative, painting Marcus as an opportunist exploiting a technicality to hurt innocent families. But public sentiment wasn't on their side anymore. Every newscast replayed Marcus's calm voice saying, "You came for my family's land. You took what wasn't yours. Now I'm just following the law you claim to respect." And then, the real shock. A court order granting Marcus temporary control over several of the disputed properties, meaning the HOA board members themselves, who lived on those lots, now technically occupied homes he legally owned. When sheriff's deputies delivered the official notices, it was poetic justice. The same cold, bureaucratic tone Marcus had heard in that office weeks ago was now turned on them. Standing on his porch that night, Marcus looked out over the quiet fields. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. But this wasn't over. The HOA was appealing. The threats were still coming, and the legal battle ahead would be brutal. Still, Marcus had changed the game. The hunter had become the hunted. Now, the question wasn't whether he could win, it was how far he was willing to go to make sure they never tried this again. When the legal battle ended, there was no celebration, just a deep, shaking breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. On paper, the victory was clear. The land was rightfully his again. But in his heart, the scars ran deeper than the loss itself. This wasn't simply about acres and property lines. It was about dignity stolen in broad daylight. About a reminder that no matter your success, your education, your hard work, there are still those who believe they can take what's yours because of the color of your skin. Standing there, he realized this wasn't just his fight. It was the fight of every black family who's ever had to prove again and again that they belong. The story refused to die quietly. It exploded across headlines, was shared in millions of posts, and turned into the kind of conversation that forces people to confront uncomfortable truths. Neighbors who once waved politely now looked him in the eye with something different: respect, maybe even guilt. Politicians felt the heat. Laws were drafted. People who had never cared about property rights suddenly understood why this mattered. His stand had become a spark, igniting a fire that burned far beyond his hometown. And for the first time, he felt something that had been buried under months of rage: hope. But here's the haunting truth. For every story like his that makes headlines, there are countless more that die in silence. Families losing their land, their homes, their history. No cameras, no lawyers, no justice. His win was rare, almost miraculous. And that's the problem. Because in a country that calls itself free, why should justice feel like a stroke of luck? The question isn't if this will happen again. The question is, when? And when it does, will we look away? Or will we finally stand up, together, and make sure no one else has to fight this same battle?